We'll go ahead and go back into session.
Councilmember Myers.
Here.
Councilmember Burke. Here. Councilmember Rupp.
Here.
Councilmember Stevens.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Dalby.
Here. Okay, and at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Mr. Bill Mulder from Mulder & Associates for our next candidate interview.
Thank you. Bill Mulder, Mulder & Associates Consultant. The next candidate that is here to be interviewed is Mr. Philip Rath.
Okay, and good morning, Mr. Rath. You have the floor.
All right, thank you. I'm going to hand this out here quick.
You betcha.
Just pass them down.
All right, so what I just handed out was just a copy of a few of the slides for the presentation I'm going to do here, and that is going to be on financial sustainability, a case study involving Monroe, Wisconsin. So though the dollar amounts may vary, this similar statement may be made across many municipalities. And so I'll read it for the public at home. The story we tell ourselves in this city is that we're broke, busted, bankrupt. And we turn to the citizens, begging them to understand this obvious fact and to provide us more money for what we need. But how do we stand behind this story when we collect over $600 million in every year? Now that's Toledo, maybe a little bit more, but the concept is there. We're not broke. We just choose to lock in our assumptions that every dollar we spend is spent exactly as it should be. Now, first and foremost, residents and businesses trust us with their tax dollars. It's our responsibility to ensure that these dollars are spent wisely. So, the issue in Monroe, due to levy constraints and aging infrastructure, the city is facing a structural deficit, jeopardizing the financial sustainability of the community. This financial instability was due to a lack of revenue for fixed assets, aging infrastructure, and a structural deficit in the operational budget. With fixed assets, the city wasn't levying sufficient funds for replacement of equipment, facilities, technology, and vehicles. And this is just a quick snapshot, but an analysis showed that on an annual basis, the city should have been putting aside almost $1.8 million every year to get full replacement value for the vehicles, facilities, equipment, and technology. In 2015, the levy, $92,400. Far cry, about 5% of what we should have been setting aside if the choice was for full replacement value. Public Works project spending is one I think you're familiar with. The aging infrastructure or mandates. It's high cost to maintain or replace public infrastructure. And the thought of out of sight, out of mind. How many miles pipeline of sewer, water, they're underground. They're forgot about. You know, they can last 80, 100, 130 years here, I hear, and they're not touched. Generations ago, they were paying for that. Now we're going to be asked to pay for it again. The traditional line item budget has a tendency to look at the budget as a one-year process, often failing to recognize decisions made in a given year may affect future operating or capital budgets. We want to try to avoid the 7 deadly sins of budgeting: robbing Peter to pay Paul, borrowing, selling assets, or, in my opinion, worse, delaying asset maintenance or replacement. When we step back and project out the budgetary expenditures over a multi-year period, we can see that incremental rate of growth. You can see in the back half there, the projections. And unfortunately, revenues don't tend to grow at that same rate. Without intervention, we can anticipate a growing structural deficit, which puts financial sustainability of the community at risk. You can see that gap widening over time. So what was my role in helping address this issue? Well, first of all, I helped to dissect the budget and identify and explain the spending habits and what's necessary to continue to provide the desired services at an efficient level. And for us, we had about 55% was spent on personnel, 30% on non-personnel costs just to provide services. And we were setting aside about 15% into fixed assets, capital, and debt service. So I looked to see if there was a sufficient amount of dollars that we could reinvest into the capital needs of the municipality now and into the future. In addition to fixed assets, the city needed to consider future public works projects. We had 70 miles of roadway, replacing the road and the infrastructure underneath. We also had 5 tax increment districts with 100 acres of land looking at future development. So I worked with staff to address the fixed assets and the insufficient funding, verify the list of fixed assets. Were my numbers correct at 1.8 million? Was that property, vehicles, equipment that we needed to continue in the future? Maybe there were some things that we could offload and not have to continue to set aside and pay for in the future. Calculated the full replacement value of those assets, what was left. Estimated the expected life of expectancy for those, and that came up with that number to determine the 1.8 million. And then we established a goal to incrementally increase that amount year over year to grow towards that goal of that 1.8. In regards to infrastructure, again, working with staff, want to identify and verify the list of public assets. How old were they? What kind of shape were they in? How quickly would they need to be replaced? And roads, wells, towers, lift stations. And then we reviewed and recommended long-term maintenance programs. We looked out to see, is there something we could do differently? Were there some cases where we could take a well maintenance program and work with a company and pay an annual fee and have them help with that, and they rehabbed it. And so it extended the life of the well. We didn't have to dig a new well. And we'd be pushing that out a little bit further, but in a responsible manner. Because we're still maintaining it, we're getting better quality water, and they're on the hook for helping with that. Same thing with water towers. Do we have to build a new water tower, or can we work to rehab the one we have? And then reporting that out, making it aware to the public. So when those dollar amounts are coming, or there's talk about rates and looking at, do we need to increase the rates to help pay for future infrastructure, that the public was aware of that. And they knew that there was an issue and what the solution was. And then making sure that that got into the 5-year capital plan that we were doing so that we weren't missing out. If we were doing a road project and there's a water line that needs to be done, making sure we're coordinating that. So we're not tearing up a road and 2 years later going back in to now do the water. With structural deficit, here's my approach to budgeting. I view the budget as a planning document. I maintain an objective approach, trying not to favor one division over another. And that was part of our mission statement that we grew to say, how do we all work together? Maintain services with high community priorities, limit the negative impact of any reduced or eliminated services, limit the impact on current employees, and address the structural deficit by reducing the operating levy and maintaining or increasing capital. Here's a common tactic, across the board cuts. And this was from, I think it was in California. Across the board approach spreads reductions as evenly as possible so no single program gets singled out. Well, that reaction, the governor's approach would be like a family deciding to cut its monthly mortgage payment, dining out tab, and Netflix subscription each by 10%, rather than eliminating the restaurant and DVD spending in order to keep up the house payments. We have to make sure our priorities are in line with what is most important. Although this method is intended to be a fair approach to help everyone share in the pain, it's often leads to a reduction in office supplies in one division, while another might have staffing issues. So what did I do to help with that? I introduced the concept of a new budgeting process to the city, priority-based budgeting. Helped guide the council to identify the important priorities and definitions, and then steered the staff through the implementation of that process. Priority-based budgeting takes a targeted approach to the budget. It's viewed as a best practice by the International City County Management Association and the GFOA. Rather than a year-over-year review of line item spending, priority-based budgeting identifies the services provided, the cost of providing those services, applies a score against how those priorities line up with the municipality, and then gives you an opportunity to kind of put them against each other. Service versus service, not department versus department. Priorities and definitions, they came from the recently updated comprehensive plan. So there was public participation with this. They had a say in what those priorities were. And then the council helped to say, yes, these are the top 5 priorities. These are how we're going to define what those priorities look like when applying them to the scoring that the staff then did. And then I worked through with the staff and we identified all the services. There were hundreds of services. In this community, there might even be thousands of services in a full service community. And each of those has their own score and priority in terms of what is necessary. So then the employees helped with applying the costs, personnel, non-personnel costs to those. We scored those against what the priorities that were established and validated those scores. So there was consistency. So who was included? Well, with any community-wide issue like this, it is important to involve all the key stakeholders. And this, in this case, included the Finance and Taxation Committee, who was responsible for setting the priorities and the budgetary goals and guidelines. The Board of Public Works, who was responsible for establishing the utility rates, recommended public works projects. Staff, obviously they had a role. The supervisors helping to present the department budgets. Common Council adopting the budget, capital plan, and debt service. Community partners presenting their budget requests and recommendations for programming. And the residents and business leaders that helped to establish the priorities in the comprehensive plan. Outcomes. So fixed assets, like I said earlier, we were able to start growing that trend forward and increasing the amount of spending that we had. We had educated on the infrastructure needs, and we instituted the priority-based budgeting. We introduced a more formal economic analysis into the budget deliberations. The benefits and costs of each program were determined, and funds were allocated to the programs providing the greatest net benefits. And here's a quick snap of what happened over time. And in 2020, I'm happy to say that actually increased to 700,000. So we were making some great progress with our capital set aside. And as the new accounts continue to build, it will reduce the need to borrow for operational capacity, thereby freeing up debt service capacity for major public works projects. And here's a quick little snapshot of priority-based budgeting and one of the tools, a resource allocation tool they call it. It helps us to understand the why of the spending. We know what we do. In most cases, we know how we do it, but why do we continue to do what it is we do? Traditional line item budgets often fall short of that. This process helps us to see why we spend and where we spend, why we spend that way. We can look at how much we spend and what we value. And the goal is to reallocate those resources in areas where there's lower priorities, taking those dollars, not spending as much there, putting into the higher priority issues and the services that we want to. Aside from just cutting though, it may help identify areas where you can get new revenues. If people are willing to pay for a very popular service, there might be an ability to help with the fee structure. And finally, it's going to look at historical trend over time. The gray area there was the general fund budget. And I know we have a little bit different in Wisconsin and Iowa, but you can see over time, especially in 17, 18, when the priority-based budgeting was instituted, that levy went down. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much for that informative presentation, Mr. Rath. We appreciate that. And at this time, I'll open it up to council for a question session. We will stick to the same questions we asked the other candidate and attempt to be fair to you. And so we'll start with Council Member Berg for her question.
Thank you. Ottumwa has a diverse and ever-changing population. How do you envision or propose making Ottumwa, specifically city government or city operations, more inclusive for all community members?
Well, one of the things that we started to do in Monroe was reaching out to the community and trying to get programs that would help open and engage conversation and dialogue. And you know, one of the things that I've recognized and noticed through my career is that when you get different cultures, sometimes there's a distrust, mistrust of government. And they're not, individuals that don't trust government aren't going to come forward and seek services or reach out for the things that are important to them. And so you have to get into the community and get into where people are at and hit them up on their turf and be able to start a conversation. And that's something that I've been able to do is start a conversation and talk with people over a multitude of things, whether it's kids in school or what's your favorite recipe or anything, and just starting that connection, making that connection, and starting that conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Rowe.
Thank you for being here today. Can you define your leadership style, and can you give an example of how you would bring departments together to work towards a common goal?
Certainly. I would define my leadership style as I'm a team player. I strive for continuous improvement. I look to get the best out of people, continually evaluating talent, skills, knowledge, abilities of individuals, and working to get the best out of them. I'm not one that likes to micromanage. If I delegate a task, I will give the task. I will see if there's any questions, if there's any feedback that the individual needs, but then I allow them to take that project on their own. You know, I'm available for any follow-up questions, feedback, advice. If there's any particular direction or things that need to be specified for the outcome, I'll give that in the initial. But otherwise, you know, I found that when people take ownership of a project or program, they're willing to put more into it. You know, the thing with delegating is you have to be able to let go and know that people aren't going to do things necessarily the same way you would do it, and be willing to accept that. They may find a different way to do it that's better. They might find a way that isn't as good but got the job done. And I think when people can be allowed to learn from their own mistakes and failures, you learn a lot more from that. Just don't make the same mistake twice.
Okay, Bob?
Yes. Well, and Phil, thank you for your presentation. And you had mentioned you would explain a bit on the priority budgeting, and that was good. Thank you. My question is then coming back to you as administrator working with the council. Mm-hmm. And so 3 parts actually. What would be the ideal way for the administrator to help the mayor and council in a certain direction? A second part of that would be, what strategy would you use then for you to help promote policy development? And then the last part of that, and I know it's quite a combination, but the last part of it would be, not that this council would ever have any differences of opinion, but if we did, what would be your role in trying to work with those differences?
Okay. The first part of the question is, how would I work with the council? Right out of the gate, I'd want to take an opportunity to meet all of you on an individual basis and introduce myself, a little bit of my background and where I'm coming from. I mean, outside of, you know, what you see in the resume and other things, you know, some of the life experiences, so to speak. And more than we can do in just this 45 minutes of an interview. So, you know, when I'm coming and I'm approaching a task or a project, what I'm bringing to the table, but then also take that from you as well, and know what passions you have and what interests you have individually, and help see where that fits as a group and where it fits with the community itself. One thing I found is that everybody has a different communication style, how they like to communicate and how they like to receive communication. And letting that out there right out of the gate, you know. So it's, for example, a lot of people just like to email. You know, I'm one, I prefer face-to-face or over the phone contact if I can. In an email, it's so easy to miss the tone or intent of what was stated, and all of a sudden somebody's off and upset about something that was not meant that way. So when I can do it face-to-face, that's my preferred. Time allows, I understand, you in the middle of the night, you fire off an email and, you know, I'm not expecting a response right away. I told staff I get 80, 100 emails in a day. If it's something that's time pressing, you know, a text, a phone call, you know, whatever else, because when you're in the middle of a project, you might not be looking at your emails throughout the day, and as they come in, you need to, you know, set aside an hour or two or whatever it is and focus that. So it's identifying what the communication style is. So I make sure that I'm communicating properly with the individual and they're communicating back. Second part was...
Second part was, so what strategies?
Oh, okay.
What strategies
Make sure that the council is all together?
Yes.
I like to have a goal setting. You know, when I can, if you can have a retreat or a morning session, something like this, where you can set aside, especially if it's a new fiscal year or where it might be, and say, what's the direction? Where are we looking at going? What is on the agenda? And, you know, identify what it is for the year or whatever time frame it is that is of importance to the council. And it's usually is a good time whenever there's a new council member or members to make sure that the body itself is still on the same page, and that the goals are still, for the individuals as well as the collective. And then the last part was when there's a disagreement.
Yes.
Then, it's where it's my role to step in and help to facilitate conversation. I can definitely do that. I have 7 children. They fight from time to time. I get to play referee. I know how that goes. The important thing, though, is to remember that there's that civility, and you can disagree. Vehemently on things, but as long as you do so in a civil way and you're bringing your perspective, I think you can get a lot more out of that. If everybody agrees all the time, well, that's great, but you're not necessarily improving either.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm up on this question here. Mine revolves around something you just discussed with Councilmember Myers, and that's communication. My question revolves more around communication with the public. And just to give you a little background, we do the best we can with public communication, but our staff, we require a lot out of our staff. They are overloaded a lot in most cases and don't have a lot of time to put that effort into each department head doing their own one-on-one interviews with the public. But when we have situations that arise, and some of them can be very contentious, and when issues arise in the public obviously, has a lot of questions a lot of the time. How is your style with how do you do communication with the public? Are you going to be willing to engage the public, be open to the public questions, work with media such as the paper, the radio, and get out ahead of the stories and put the staff's side out there so that the public can be informed on each and every issue? We've had a history in the past of negativity in Ottumwa, when people don't fully understand. And I believe that's where a lot of the negativity comes from, is that they don't fully understand what's going on. In the past, Ottumwa's city administrators have had a history of getting burnt out on the negativity, getting offended by it, and then simply, barricading themselves in the office and not talking about it. That is, in my opinion, as a public elected official, unacceptable. There's also been the overshadowing that the council is to, let staff take care of the communications, because, multiple opinions kind of add to public not having so many different opinions that nobody really knows what's going on either. That being said, I look to the city administrator many times as being the leader on putting out the facts and stuff to the public, but that doesn't work when the administrator is not willing to do that. Mm-hmm. And that means being, a lot of the face of the city, much like we are to the public, in representing them. Are you going to be willing to be able to be out there and put that face forward on each individual issue and take the time to inform the public when those issues arise, rather than, go into the office and not speak with the public on issues that come out?
Quick, simple answer is yes. As long as that is a desire of the council, then I am completely comfortable with doing that. In Monroe, I had offered a standing meeting to the print media. Now, I would push out information that was more timely if needed, but we had a standing meeting. It was Tuesday at 2:00 following council meetings. If they had any questions, information, whatever else, and I said, this is the time we had both agreed to that worked for both of us. We had it penciled in. And if there, we didn't meet every week, but when we did, there was, an opportunity there. I didn't obviously just rest on that either. Pushed out stuff as it came. We had worked on updating our website, and it's kind of going through another phase right now, but it was definitely using that as an informational platform and making sure that that website fed good and well into smartphones as well. And so that if you had a tablet or smartphone, the interface read well. And that was an important thing, is because so many people have the phones, and you're looking at the weather's it's snowing outside. Is the practice canceled? If it was a Parks and Rec program, okay, we'll put it out there. Let's get it. Get that information out, because that's what people want to know. Right. And with a family, we want to know what's going on. Instagram. I drive my kids to school, and my daughter isn't texting her friend about, hey, I'm on my way to school. She sends a picture. Here I am. Like, so we're living our life through pictures and emojis. It's how things are. So it's getting into that. The most recent staff member I hired was an administrative assistant, and one of the reasons that we hired her and that she had an edge over the others was she was the social media person for the company she worked at. And she was posting witty, fun, positive comments that were informational about the business. And that, the public image thing, it's all over. That's one of the hardest things being in municipal management, service-oriented things, is everything we do is under a microscope. Everyone's got their cameras, and you get somebody parks in the wrong spot and a snapshot of it. Somebody's doing this. So how do you get past that? I agree with you. You have to get the positive comments out, the education, the information, so people get the right story to begin with.
Right. And like I told the other candidate, and there are things we cannot talk about in public, and there are things that are private, protected under the law, and those things I'm not talking about. Yeah. But for instance, for example, we have a downtown streetscape project going on, and we have gotten very much better at I think, communicating with our downtown businesses ahead of the game, what they're going to expect. We have a great Main Street director who's taking charge in communicating with businesses on the struggles that they're going to face with this project. But we also have, for example, a transit issue right now of choosing. We've been directed by the state to continue, either continue or not continue with our current transit system. We just went through that the other day. And what I've seen is, a lot of people don't tune into our council meetings. And so, the media does the best they can to put out what they hear in our council meetings and report to the public. But the public, reads that, and then they develop their own set of questions that I think the city needs to come out with. Here's what we've done. Here's what you're going to receive due to the decision of the council. This is what this picture is going to look like. A public statement, for example. We should do that. That is, our job to educate the public as best we can. We have not done that in this situation. Those are the type of things I want to see out of a city administrator. Be very open and honest. And that turns a lot of that negativity, for example, into positivity. And it educates the public, so they get direction on where the changes that we make and where they need to go get the help they need. And I have found in my 6 years on this council that a little bit of communication goes a long way with the folks that we represent. And they appreciate that. And then they get supportive. And they're not going to, like everything we do, and we don't expect them to. We have to make the best decisions, sometimes the hard decisions, for the betterment of everybody we represent. But I think we can do a better job communicating with them, and I want that for our city administrator. So thank you for answering that question. I appreciate it. And then I guess we'll move on now to Councilmember Stevens.
Okay, I guess we're supposed to ask the same question we asked the other one, but the question I'm going to ask is in your resume, but maybe for the folks in the audience, it might help, and hopefully we'll have a chance for a second question. But why have you decided to leave your past position and apply for this position?
All right. Okay, so in October of last year, I did resign from position in the city of Monroe. I guess I say the short answer, the why was the council was in a position where they were looking to terminate the position or terminate my employment. I didn't have a good why as to what that was. I was informed there were no performance issues. I wasn't under anything that I was aware of. And so it was a little surprising. I resigned because that was it gave me an opportunity to negotiate a little better exit package and be able to move forward. There were some political differences. There was a personnel issue that may or may not have been the center of that. And I took a ethical stance, had completed a 18-page report on a department making 20-something recommendations, spent over 50 hours of interviews alone, probably about 100 hours in total on the report. And the individuals weren't happy with the results, and the council had subsequently looked to end my employment. Now, whether that was the exact reason or not, I don't know. The termination didn't occur, and I resigned instead.
Thank you.
So, the great news is it led me to this opportunity, and this is a fantastic city, and I would not have looked at it otherwise.
Awesome. Okay, I believe we got plenty of time here. We'll move into follow-ups. I know last round, Mark, you had a follow-up question.
So as a follow-up to the response that you just gave and viewing your resume, It looks like you're a lifetime Wisconsinite, I assume. Looking in a little bit in a crystal ball, you're applying for a position that seems to be about double the size that you came from. So this is a little bit of a move forward for you, and knowing that you're probably fairly young in your career yet. The proverbial question of where do you see yourself in 5 years, given that you have your roots up in Wisconsin, do you see yourself implanting somewhat permanently here in this community, or using this as a stopgap between employment opportunities in Wisconsin?
Yeah. No, I would see myself supplanting myself here. And for a number of reasons. One, with what we saw yesterday, even amidst the snowy weather conditions, and my wife and I doing some research ahead of time, just saw a great opportunity here for our family. I think I'd mentioned a moment ago, I have 7 kids that are in school. I don't want to have to move multiple times. There's a couple that are in high school, and it's going to be hard for them, but we have talked about this. We are ready. There's a couple in middle school and a couple in elementary. So this is something that I would see them getting through graduation. And I think I look good in black and gold and even crimson. And so, so yes, I could trade in the red and white if I needed to. And Iowa is
just for the record, Ottumwa's school colors are red and white, so you don't need to trade that in.
Perfect, because I do have a good wardrobe. Monroe's colors and Wisconsin were red, so that works good. No, I think from what we saw, we have to drive 40 miles to get to a shopping center and do all of the things we like to do. So the quality of life aspect that's here is what we're looking at. The kids that are aging, the schools that are in the area, whether it's the community college or Iowa State or any of the other schools, universities in the area are close enough that if they choose to go there, they can. And I want to have a place where the kids are going to want to come back to. Where I'm at right now, and a lot of municipalities that are similar, I don't want to be in a Madison. I don't want to be in a 100,000 population, and a lot of Wisconsin municipalities, unless it's of size, isn't going to have a lot of what we need. Ottumwa seems to have everything we're looking for.
Thank you.
Okay, good answer. I've got one more follow-up question from Councilman Myers, and I'll move on to City Administrator Lazio. So,
Well,
go ahead, Bob.
Skip didn't get to ask his original question.
Oh, then Councilmember Stevens, go right ahead. I'm sorry, I overlooked that.
Okay, tell us about a time when you had to make an unpopular personnel decision. What was the issue? How did you solve it?
Oh, that apparently wasn't that wasn't a question in the first round. Is that correct?
No, that was not. That was my second.
Well, I don't want to violate open meeting laws. I'll just say that I think my response to your first question would probably cover that.
Cover that one. The reason he was let go. Okay. All right. Moving on to interim city administrator. Bob, did you have one? You guys are all
had another
confusing me
one.
up here.
Sorry.
You have the
Yes.
floor, Councilman Myers.
Thank you. And I think you answered this in your presentation, but I want to go back to it. The question is for you to name and explain 3 of what you would think are your most important keys to having an effective budget. And you're going to say priority budgeting, and what would the 3 be?
The priorities, definitely making sure that we're lining up the services that are providing with the needs of the community. And that's where that priority budgeting falls in. Also, though, is making sure that that staff, one of the most valuable assets you have, is treated appropriately. within the limited dollars that we have, and making sure that that's done. I've worked on the compensation plan in the city of Monroe and had to update that and make sure that it was in accordance with other municipalities. Put in a paid time off program to help reduce the sick leave, unfunded sick leave bank, but also to help attract the new employees that we're looking at, because they didn't start out and they didn't have any vacation time. They had to be a year on the job before they got any time off. So making sure that we could attract good talent and retain it, making sure that we're getting training and other things that are important to staff. And then also making sure that we're budgeting appropriately for the taxpayers. That if we have a vacancy in a position, we're not just refilling that position because it's vacant. We're taking an analysis. We're looking, is that a position we need to refill? Is there importance to that? Can someone else help with that? Or is there somebody else that's already on staff and maybe we fill a different position so someone has some promotional opportunities? And so making sure that the decisions that are being made are made on a proactive basis rather than reactive.
Thank you.
Okay, now you're up, Interim City Administrator Lazio. My apologies.
Phil, thanks for coming and interviewing with us. With your experience and background, we've heard a lot of people talking about economic development. And so I'd like to know more specifically, what would you do as the first 1, 2, or 3 steps to work on economic development in our community, and be as specific as you can?
Okay. Well, one of the first things I'd want to do, and I think would be important, is to delve in and identify any current opportunities that are being done, and kind of in line with that, make sure what the rules, regulations, laws are surrounding different opportunities, whether it's tax increment financing or other funding mechanisms that may be different between Iowa and Wisconsin. Secondly, and I'd say almost as importantly, is making sure I get out and meet with all of the partners that are already there, for tourism, for Chamber, Main Street, county officials that are important to tourism. So making sure that I'm doing that as well. And then, looking at where we're at in any of the planning documents, and identifying, layout and opportunities for the city. Where are the best opportunities for new developments, redevelopments, identify if there isn't already in place, or where I can insert myself into business retention expansion planning, making sure that getting out into the community and identifying what those needs are, working with the community college to see, are there skills gaps in the labor that can be met there. So.
And a follow-up question that I asked last time. As you know, we have 5 bargaining units here in the city. So talk about your experience dealing with unions, and what's your position on cross-training staff within bargaining units?
Let's see. I served and I take the primary lead on the bargaining in the city. In fact, the city had its own labor attorney separate from the city attorney to handle a lot of those things. But oftentimes I was the one that was initiating, starting that contact and interaction. And we had the labor attorney on standby for real hairy issues. Again, it's helping to negotiate and understand ways through the contract, what's important, through the dollars that are available for various things. And, as far as cross-training, I think that's, a perfect opportunity. Unless there's specific things within your contract or document that prohibit that, I think it's a great opportunity to improve upon things. One of the things that I did in Monroe, we had different levels of laborers, skill 1, skill 2, and we helped to get the the pay rates correct so that you didn't have improper people working at improper rates, and helping with that, and helping to cross train so that people could move up into the higher skill rate. My philosophy was, hey, if everybody's a skill 2, yes, you pay more, but you also have the knowledge, skills, and ability of that. You're more versatile and you can do anything, whether it's a skill 2, a skill 1, or any other job. The key is being able to afford to pay at the higher rate.
We have about 5 minutes left. I would allow any follow-up questions to anything Mr. Rath had said. No new questions that we didn't afford Mr. Gaw the opportunity to ask. I know I have a follow-up question directly related to something you had said, and I think Councilmember Rowe has one quickly to ask.
Yeah, just really quick, you said you do have experience with dealing with unions. On a concurrent basis, how many unions were you dealing with at one time? Was it 1 union, 2 unions, 3 unions?
When I first started in Monroe, there were 3 unions, and after Act 10 in Wisconsin, one of the unions was dispatchers, just the dispatchers, a smaller group. They had disbanded or decertified. The ASME unit continued to recertify every year when there was a vote until last year, I believe it was, and then they voted to decertify. So at current, there is 1 union.
But at max,
at
there
the
was
most
3.
3.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you for that.
Yep.
I have a quick follow-up. You had said, I think it was to Mark Rowe's original question, you do not micromanage.
Mhm.
And I think while we all agree that that's probably a good way to manage, and I'm no manager by any means, I have no degree and I've never managed a single person in my life, but I think that was, and I'll just be blunt and honest with you because I think here quickly we're going to go now into closed session and recess, but I think that was the single most used excuse in this, in our last engagement with the city administrator to not manage.
Mhm.
And that concerns me because I think this community and the staff has longed for management and a manager that can direct and lay out a vision and hold staff accountable to that. So many cities don't require that. Many cities like ours need some, and many cities, unlike ours, need a lot. And so my question to you, my follow-up question to you would be, can you conform to the needs of our community? That while some cities, like I say, don't need it, some cities do, some cities need some. Can you go in and direct when you need to? Can you keep staff focused on what their job is? And if they need some guidance and some coaching and some flat out discipline, can you be the guy to go in and say, I need you to perform this work. You have until this point to do it, and I need it done, and I expect it done. Can you do that?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And let me just clarify that.
Yes,
What I meant by micromanage, I didn't mean that there would not be accountability and standards and expectations. It's just, I wouldn't necessarily dictate every step so
Sure.
that somebody is doing step 1 and coming to me and asking, is this okay? And then coming back at step 2 and step 3.
Oh,
That-
absolutely.
That, there was, the expectations were laid out and I would be available for any follow-up
Okay.
but they could take ownership and get it done in the time frame and expectations that were desired.
Right. Not badgering employees, but just making sure they are fully accountable and on task.
Correct.
And okay.
Yes. Yeah. So I'll just
And if
clarify
they
that.
have goals and that they carry those out and
Yes. And I mean, we'd have
Okay.
staff meeting. One of the things, and I'll just briefly, I know we probably got to go here.
Oh, you're good.
Okay. All
you got a
right.
minute.
I would have, typically I would have a couple of staff meetings a month with like the senior board. We call it the executive board or whatever. And, typically it was a day after a council meeting, making sure, was there anything from the last night's council meeting? Any conversation, clarification, anything else we need? What are the directives from the council? Who's responsible for X, Y, or Z? And seeing that done and, establishing time frames, bless you, and anything else in that regard. So I would do
Okay.
those meetings usually twice a month. I don't like to have meetings just to have meetings. There has to
Right.
be something to them because we're all busy. And then on a quarterly basis, typically, I would meet with those same people and the next level down. Make sure that the goals and objectives of the community were still being met. And where there was shared service or opportunities, we were looking at those.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you for that answer. I appreciate it. Okay. And at this time, I believe we're out of time. I believe we will now recess for the purpose of having a closed session to deliberate. Thank you very much, Mr. Rath, for your presentation and answering our questions.
All right.
Appreciate having you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You bet.
And my wife did make it home safely.
Awesome. That's always good news. Take care. We'll go ahead and recess at this time. It is 11:04.